We've got some Leafs reports to react to, game one of the Cup Final in the books, and a cap increase. Got to discuss all of that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centered podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Did you place a wager on the Toronto parlay today, Dave?
I may have placed a wager or two. It may have come up quite happy with my FanDuel bet.
In the green, as they say. Yeah, we're finally getting to see, some winning teams out here. You got the Jays rolling. They've won 4 or 5. You got the Boatmen, the Argos winning in their season opener tonight. Big stuff happening in Toronto. Does that mean that the tide is starting to turn, or we're going to start seeing the whole city become a winning success? Who knows? We shall see. Lots to get into on today's episode. Obviously, game one of the Cup Final in the books. We witnessed the Florida Panthers win 3-0 over the Edmonton Oilers Saturday night. We'll kind of recap our thoughts on that game. But there's a lot of Leafs news to get to. And I don't know, calling it news might be a little strong, but definitely a lot of reporting going on around the Toronto Maple Leafs, whether it's, beat writers or it's the national writers or it's the insiders like, Elliot Friedman. Lots of stuff to kind of react to today, stemming off of, a long weekend of a lot of stuff going on, not only with the Leafs, but also in the NHL as a whole. So lots to get into. So let's kick things off as we typically do. Let's start with the Leafs news, Dave. And one of the more intriguing notes that kind of came across my feed today was an article written by Steve Simmons in his latest Sunday Notes column for the Toronto Sun, suggesting that sources telling him that the Leafs are in fact listening on Mitch Marner trades, but will only go to Mitch if a team meets their asking price. What are your thoughts on this?
Makes sense, honestly. Like, the thing is, like, if you go to Mitch Marner right now and say, would you willing to move your no trade clause? We don't know where you're going to go yet, but can you waive your no trade clause? Like, it makes no sense to really do it.
Right. But what's the point in negotiating with teams and, getting to a point where you've agreed with the other side and then you go to Mitch and he's like, nah, I don't want to go. It's a waste of time.
The only thing I could say is maybe there's a little bit of a, hey, we're looking at maybe this team. We're not going to ask you to waive your no trade clause yet, but we might be talking to these teams. Like, would you be open to it? I think maybe that's where the conversation could go. Like, I'm sure they're not going to just spend all this time, like hours talking to one team and then be like, all right, I think we got a good work for a deal. Let me go talk to Mitch now. I don't think that's going to happen because both sides will be wasting their time doing something like that.
They've definitely got an idea of the teams that Mitch may or may not be interested in if they do, decide to move on from one another. But I'm like, it's weird because we're getting to a point now where it's when it comes to Mitch Marner, there seems to be kind of a new piece of information that's added on a daily basis, it seems, on the Mitch Marner front. And you've got to kind of, sift out the garbage and what's true and what's not and what's being leaked for the purposes of, the team's benefit or the player's benefit. And something like what do you think is more likely here? That this is a legitimate report and that the Leafs are going to be sticking to their guns and they're going to demand, the ransom that it should take to get a guy of the caliber of Mitch Marner's talent onto another team? Or like, does this kind of seem like something that may have been fed to a media member to go, public as a tactic to kind of drive up the price and get other teams thinking that, like, okay, the Leafs aren't going to trade Marner at a discount. We're going to have to pay up to get this guy. Because I think that's a possibility too. And that's part of the, I wouldn't say it's our job, yours and our job. It's more so the general managers around the league's job. But it does make you wonder, okay, what's the purpose of this leak? Somebody told Steve Simmons this information. Is it legitimate, or is it a tactic to try and get other teams to maybe up their price a little bit? That's kind of where I sit with this information.
Well, that's it, right? I do think that everyone's talking right now about how the Leafs would not get full value for Marner because mainly because he has a lot of say in the process. So I think what the Leafs are trying to do, as you said, is, hey, we're not just going to trade him away for the sake of trading him away. We believe there's value here. We know teams in the league do value a Mitch Marner. We're not going to just sit and take the low ball offer. And I think for them, they got to be comfortable telling teams, we'll hold on to him. Sure, he might go to free agency, but you missed out on your chance to get ahead of the game and get him.
So something else that came out of this weekend is the cap going up.
Yep.
And it's going to be rising by $4.5 million, and it's going up an additional 300,000 than what was projected. So that's a good sign of a healthy league that's generating, money, even more money than the league originally thought they were going to this season. So that's a really good sign and a great thing. It's the first time we've seen, a cap raise like this in over a decade, certainly since pre-COVID. I wonder too, because if you see this type of a raise this year, and you think about, okay, could we see the same type of raise next year where it goes up another 4.5 million, and all of a sudden you look at it, a $92.5 million cap, the year that Marner's deal would be expected to start, you're adding an extra 9 million in cap to what's already sitting there right now for the Maple Leafs. I wonder if they look at the increase and they think to themselves, hey, the league's in a good spot. If we get, to have a similar season and we get up to like 92 and a half, 93 million the year that Marner's contract is about to would kick in, the extension would kick in, maybe it's worth keeping this guy around because, there'll just be more money to go around so that, maybe million and a half increase that he's going to be wanting on his current deal doesn't look as bad when the cap is going up by 9 million over the next 2 years by the time that deal kicks in. I wonder if that is starting to set into the mind of the Maple Leafs.
I think that partly plays to part of that belief.
Let me say as a worst case scenario, by the way.
We're not advocating for the Leafs to do that.
I should clarify. If no one meets the price, then they could be thinking to themselves, with the cap going up, it may not be the worst thing to re-sign him to like a $12.5 million deal because of how far the cap is going up, as opposed to trading him for pennies on the dollar or letting him walk for nothing. That's what I mean by that, by the way. Not that the Leafs are like, hey, we should hang on to this guy and give him all this money. That's kind of a secondary. If we don't get what we're asking for, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Well, I just don't see a scenario where the Leafs really want to let Mitch Marner walk for nothing unless like the ask is just way too much. I think it's not just the salary, but it's also the term. Matthews is only on the books for 4 years.
What's the difference between 6, 7, 8 years at that point? I don't think.
Well, I know, from 6, 7, 8, yes, but we're talking about like Matthews took 4 and 8.
5.
Like that's a thing. Was it 5?
It was a 5. Not that it matters, but
like again, it's the term only. The only reason I bring that up is because we're also like, how many increases are we going to see with the salary cap? Like this is a significant jump. There's supposed to be another one. How many more are we expecting between now and let's say 5 years from now?
Well, right? I think you could assume it might increase another 3 to 5 million every year. Like, so, 3 years from now, you could be pushing up on $100 million salaries.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are realizing too, obviously, you have to be careful not to let a Mitch Marner walk for nothing because he is an asset, but you also have to remember what the priorities are. That's to build the right team that's going to win.
Mhm.
It's hard to do that again with the current structure that the Leafs are on, but we also have to remember things are going to change. A year
Well,
after next year,
Tavares' money
Tavares
will
is not
also
making that
be
money.
available. Right. So that money
Yeah.
will also be available on top of the extra 9 million. So you're talking like honestly, from this year's cap to like the year
Mhm.
Marner and Tavares need an extension. If you take away Marner's money or you take away Tavares's money and you add the added cap space that you're getting, that's like 20 million extra dollars that we're
Mhm.
talking about the current salary right now. You could add
Yeah.
a lot for 20 million. And that's
You-
including Marner at 10.9.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how many
Take
teams will
Marner's
want.
out, you're pushing you're over 30 million in cap space just with Marner's money, Tavares's money, and then the 2-year increase. 30 million you're looking at.
Yeah, so like that's significant for a team like Toronto. Like as much as people are saying, "Oh, they're paying a lot for Matthews, they're paying a lot for Nylander," you now know with the salary cap increase what those guys cost. A few years from
Mhm,
now, Edmonton's got to worry about McDavid, they got to worry about Draisaitl, and they got to figure out a way to
mhm,
get Bouchard done this year. The Leafs
mhm.
don't have that problem right now. They really only have a Mitch Marner problem. They've got their other two stars locked up. That's an enviable position. That's why a lot of teams it kind of worked out for them to get it done, even with the flat cap, because they were able to keep those salaries a little bit lower before the real boom goes up. And you know that when
Well,
the salary cap increases, whose salary increases the most?
the Stars.
It's the stars,
Yeah,
right? And so
yeah.
that's why you're going to start hearing more like the McDavids are going to ask for more, not less.
But I do think that Matthews and Nylander's deals did factor in the salary cap increase. I do
Yeah,
think that was the case, and Marner's will as well. So I wouldn't say they benefited from anything. I think that those 3 in particular benefited on their first deal by getting max dollar and,
right.
whatever term they wanted, basically walked them all to UFA status, and then also got max dollar and whatever term they wanted on their second contracts as well, or third contract, I suppose, as well. But we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening with Mitch Marner. But the latest, I suppose, is they are listening. They are actively listening. Are they shopping? I don't know if that's a term that we can necessarily use, but they are listening, and they will only go to Mitch Marner if a team meets their asking price. So that's kind of the latest with Mitch Marner. There's also a report from Elliot Friedman about a potential goaltender that the Leafs could be interested in. Let's come back and talk about that guy on the other side. You're listening to Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, and more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from Finals MVP to Conn Smythe, who's going to hit it out of the park. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every Monday through Friday. We are a 5-day-a-week Maple Leaf centric podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcast from and also up on YouTube as well. We are on our road to 10K subscribers. We're about 5,500, almost 5,600. So we're not particularly close to the 10K range, but once we get there, we're giving away a jersey. So the quicker you guys sub up, there's still a lot of people who watch this show on a daily basis that are not subscribed. We see the numbers. I know who you are. Quicker you get to 10K, the quicker one of you lucky listeners will end up with a Maple Leafs jersey. Hopefully we can get it done by the start of the next season. Fingers crossed on that one. All right. So the second piece of Leaf news that kind of came out over the weekend was from Elliot Friedman talking about a particular goaltender that the Maple Leafs may have interest in. Wasn't necessarily saying that for sure the Leafs have contacted the Calgary Flames about Jacob Markstrom, but on paper he says it makes sense. And his words were on the 32 Thoughts podcast that other managers that he had spoken to said it would make sense if the Leafs were to engage in talks to see what it would take to get Markstrom out of Calgary. And the fact that Treliving seems to be in on everything. He calls on anyone and everyone. So it makes sense that a need such as number one goalie, a guy like Markstrom, someone who Brad Treliving once before courted to Calgary, would have interest in this player. The question is, Dave, will Calgary negotiate in good faith? We kind of heard that they were not willing to do so when it came to Nikita Zadorov and Chris Tanev earlier this year. Will they bury kind of the hatchet and, negotiate in good faith in a Jacob Markstrom deal? Or does this seem like, yeah, it makes sense on paper, but doesn't sound like it'll happen?
Well, I think the big one here is like when the Leafs were looking at making the Tanev Zadorov trade, there was some salary tension and compensation the way they wanted to do the deal. Like Calgary had no interest. Like Calgary's not in the business to help Brad Treliving whatsoever. They made that pretty clear from what we heard during the year. But here's the thing. If they're going to be that petty, potentially, if the Leafs offer a pretty good deal, but they decide, yeah, we're not doing business with the Toronto, you're doing yourself so much of a disservice because this is a team that if you're Craig Harmer, you can be like, yeah, we know you guys work well together. You know that you liked Markstrom, you brought him in. We'll let you have him, but you're gonna have to pay up for him, right?
Yeah. What would you pay for Jacob Markstrom? What does that look like for you? A deal?
Ooh, man.
Because New Jersey's come out and
I know
basically said they're willing to give up the 10th overall pick for Jacob Markstrom. How can the Leafs beat that?
They can't.
Like, they've got the 23rd pick, so they do have a first-round pick if they want to include it in the deal, but then they'd have to add on top of that to beat Jersey's deal, and that's not even to say maybe LA, maybe Ottawa would come in and try and make some sort of deal as well. Like, it'd be a commodity. There's going to be a bit of a bidding war. I don't know if the Leafs will be able to get in on that because what I believe is, and it's not necessarily, them being super petty, but if they are going to make a trade, the Leafs will probably have to be like a little bit better than everybody else in order to make that deal with them. Like they would prefer to deal him to, Ottawa, or prefer to deal him to maybe not LA because it's the same conference, but definitely New Jersey over a team like Toronto. Like they'll have to pay some sort of tax to get Markstrom. And I just don't know if that necessarily would be worth it, or not even that's worth it, but do they even have the pieces to make it done, to make it happen? That's what I wonder.
Well, and here's the thing, like you mentioned Ottawa. If you're looking at a team that is desperate for goaltending, like other than New Jersey, they might be the second most desperate team in the league.
I think they are the most desperate. But
here's what they got to offer. New Jersey's got the 10th overall pick. Ottawa has 7 and 25. Ottawa also has some guys on the roster they want to move, like a Jacob Chikrin, like I think I heard Thomas Chabot's name's also out there too.
Ooh, really?
I've heard. I can't remember. I think was it Friedman that mentioned it, or someone mentioned that. Like they got a lot of defensemen, right? If you look at their team, they got so many guys signed long term. It's not all going to fit. And I think Chikrin is obviously the one that they're most concerned about because he hasn't exactly expressed a desire to remain.
Well, he's like same situation as Marner, where I think he's a pending UFA at the end of the season. So it's either figure out an extension or trade him, find somewhere he wants to go. I don't know if Calgary's that team that he would want to go to, but.
And I've heard also, I think Bruce Garriock, I read, he said that Ottawa was also looking at Ullmark. Like they're looking at every goaltender. If you got a goaltender, the centers are gone.
But again, would Boston trade Ullmark within the division?
I think that was part of the I think Boston tried their best to get him out of the division to LA, and Allmark's like, no, I'm not going, because again, teams give these guys no trade clause. This is the one thing about Jacob Markstrom that I think people are forgetting. He has a no trade clause.
Yeah,
he has a say. Like Calgary could say, yeah, we're not trading you to Toronto. Ottawa's got the better offer, and Mark could just be like, I'm not going to go there. But we also know that Jacob Markstrom doesn't. He just wants to get out of Calgary now. Like, he didn't say it, but his language, his body language. I watched a lot of. He was not happy with how they handled his situation.
No, and reports came out after that he was willing to waive to go to New Jersey. He was ready to go to Jersey. They just weren't able to make a deal for whatever reason. Just didn't end up happening at the end of the day. But he was ready to go. It seemed like he was willing to waive, and they weren't able to hammer out the deal. And the Devils paid dearly for it. I can tell you that. But yeah, so it'd be an amazing pickup for the Maple Leafs. Like, that would shore up your goaltending. You get Markstrom in there for 55 games. You got Joseph Woll, to play 25, 28 games, whatever it may be. Like, that's a perfect 1-2 punch that we're talking about, where you shored up your goaltending, and then hey, it's not even a bad contract. Like, he's got 2 years left at $6 million. Like, that's a pretty good deal for a number one goaltender.
Yep.
So I would say, of the guys who are available that we think are available, at least, like, that are on these trade bait boards, like, Markstrom would be my number one option. I would say he would be my number one option. Whether or not the Leafs can match the offer of other teams, because I think he will be a hot commodity this summer, and the Leafs don't really have much, unfortunately. And then, are they going to ask for like a kicker, essentially? Are they even going to negotiate in good faith, because it's Calgary and Treliving and there's bad blood? So there's kind of two things going against the Leafs when it comes to them possibly acquiring Jacob Markstrom. But did think it was noteworthy that Frege did bring it up and bring up the Maple Leafs as like a specific team that might be interested. So it was definitely worth talking about.
Also, Freeman, because I wrote the rumor roundup on it. He also said that, like, Nashville wants to keep Saros.
Yeah.
And that changes a whole. Like, if I'm Calgary, I am praying that UC Saros does not leave Nashville, because guess what? Teams that thought they can go the Saros route, they got rerouted to Calgary, and they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's take advantage." Like that. That's where Calgary is probably happy to see that as well.
Absolutely. That means that the Markstrom price tag goes a little bit higher. Not as much supply out there, and even more demand. So, basic economics show, that's exactly when prices start to rise. Coming up on the other side, Dave, let's dig into game one of the Stanley Cup Final. I know I watched it. You watched it. Let's give our thoughts on it. And also, RIP to one of the GOATs. We'll tell you what we're talking about on the other side. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti with you. Before we get into the Panthers and Oilers game one of the Cup Final in the books now, we got to pour one out for Cap Friendly, brother. Cap Friendly will be no more. The team has been purchased, but actually, you know what? You tell the story. You've got all the information. You kind of wrote the piece that went, or you edited the piece.
Yeah, it's a little cool when you get an email for Elliot Friedman and you're like the first to see the news other than him, because he's reporting it. But I got an email saying Cap Friendly. Okay.
Basically, subject line, just Cap Friendly.
Yeah, it literally said Cap Friendly. I knew a story was coming in, and the story, for those who don't know, is that Cap Friendly is being purchased. The website's being purchased by the Washington Capitals. Did not know that it was actually possible. You can just literally purchase a website like that, but it's more so the infrastructure and the data.
That's not the first time that this has happened. What was the site before Cap Friendly?
Cap Geek. That one was
Cap
a
Geek, same thing.
little different because the owner of the website died, and all that kind of got brought in. I think I can't remember where it got purchased or where it went to, but that's kind of how that whole
Didn't
situation happened. I
didn't
think he
didn't Tolsky start one of those sites and then he was
it
hired
might have
and he was
been.
promoted?
I just know that the owner of Cap Geek had passed away, but I think he
Yeah.
sold the site before he died. I mean, I might be wrong on that, but that's something
But
along
anyways,
those lines. So essentially, Washington's buying the website, but the website's going to remain like functional until July 5th.
the fifth.
Once
Okay.
the 5th. So that means people can use it during the draft. They can use it during the bid of free agency. July 5th, the site goes dark.
Oh, it's so upsetting. I mean, cap friendly. Like we use that site all the
Oh,
time. Everyone uses that site all the time. So it makes sense, I guess, that a team looks at it and says, this is a very useful tool. We would like to make this ours. And obviously there's far more to it. There's more algorithms, there's more resources that are within the website that probably neither one of us even knew to utilize properly that Washington is getting. But yeah, it's really unfortunate that that we're losing one of the better cap websites out there. So we could pour one out for cap friendly. That being said, I will say this: Puckpedia is a good resource to use outside of cap friendly. Very similar, just a similar type website. I don't think they have as many like trade
cool.
machines and stuff like that. Not as many like tools, but in terms of getting information about the cap and player, trade clauses and cap money and all that, like that's a pretty good resource, Puckpedia. So yeah, I mean, congrats to Cap Friendly. That's awesome. They're the guys who run it clearly getting the bag, getting paid a lot of money for
Oh yeah.
from the Washington Capitals. And sometimes
Washington has money. They got money.
well, they got
So
money, but that's part of the reason why people start businesses like this and like online businesses like this is to eventually get big enough where they get bought and purchased. Like that's where you make your money when you get bought out by a parent company and you sell your company. That's when you really make your money. So, they've I don't know, was there any reported figures? Probably not.
No, there was no reported figures.
I'd imagine a multi-million-dollar deal though.
1,000%. Like Ted Leonis, who owns the Capitals, he's got money, lots of money.
Yeah,
he
deep
owns an
pockets.
NBA team on top of the Capitals. So when you're a multi-team owner, you've got the money there. So it's very interesting how that kind of all played out. Obviously very sad, but yes, as you said, there are other resources. Puckpedia is now like everyone. Like I think the one place that's going to benefit the most is Puckpedia because every single follow up tweet to that is, at least we still got Puckpedia. Make sure you go and check out Puckpedia. So
for now,
they gotta lean in on it. They gotta lean on it for as long as they can.
Well, if they're gonna get this, upgrade in traffic to their site, that'll bring more, money to their website and allow them to, obviously ad space is what sells, for the
Yeah.
Sites aren't really free. They're
No.
free because they're exposing you to free advertisement. That's how the world works.
Yes.
And the more eyeballs means the more money, which means hopefully they'll be able to put more money into it and make upgrades to their site and kind of make it, more user friendly and, give us more tools like trade tools and whatnot. So I look forward to seeing what Puckpedia can do now that they're the number one capologist site out there for all those armchair capologists such as you and I, Dave. All right, the Stanley Cup Final was underway the other night. Game 1, Panthers took game 1. What'd you think of that game?
Well, gee, it looked a little familiar, didn't it?
Officer Bob stealing games. Yeah,
Gee, I'd never seen that one before. Couldn't call that one.
Yeah, I mean,
I
sort of.
mean, in a
Edmonton
way,
definitely played a lot better than Toronto did in that
yes.
series. I will say, like, Edmonton carried play. Like, Edmonton deserved to win that game. Bobrovsky played extremely well against Toronto in that series, but I wouldn't say that the Leafs mustered up as much offense as
No,
Edmonton did
no, they
in
didn't.
any of
And
those.
like, man, like if you're Edmonton, they were talking. The storyline's already coming out. Like, will Bobrovsky get in their head? And like, that's just. It's funny that that's already started after one game
I
because
know.
it could completely flip in game two. Right? We've seen that. I've seen that happen before, but
Yeah.
someone here may have thrown a little money on the Bobrovsky Conn Smythe odds while there was still at plus odds.
Are they no longer at plus odds?
No, I'm just saying, like it. I
Oh,
made
yeah.
sure I got to it before he has another. Like, if this is something that we're going to be seeing throughout the series, we already know where this is going to go.
I just thought of something. Who drafted Bobrovsky in our fantasy draft?
I hope we were going to bring that up.
I believe it was me. I believe Team DiStefano has Bobrovsky on his side, and that's a shutout. That's 5 points. Nice. Thank you, Officer Bobs. Thank you very much. I think Edmonton has a lot to be proud of, though. Like, that was a really good game. Like, they controlled it right from the get-go. They barely allowed any shots on net. They gave up a couple of, like, good scoring chances, which Florida was able to capitalize on. But overall, I thought Edmonton was far and away the better team, like pretty much start to finish. Just couple of lapses, and you know the Panthers were able to capitalize. That part is familiar, also. By the way, Toronto carries play, couple lapses, couple mistakes, and they usually pay for it. That part is very familiar.
It is very familiar, and I was very happy when Carter Verhaeghe had scored that first goal
Mhm.
because I remember that I had Carter Verhaeghe on my team.
Yeah, you
So,
did.
so that
Yeah, you
made me
did.
quite happy. But I totally forgot about the shutout and what that did.
The extra 2 points for the shutout.
Yep.
Um, you know what was weird that popped in my mind while watching that game? Like, again, always have Leafs mode on my mind for whatever reason. It's crazy to me that the Oilers are in the Cup Final and they've got Cody Ceci playing 20 minutes a night for their team, and they were able to make it to a Stanley Cup Final. Isn't that insane to think about?
Oh, it was
Like, Cody
insane.
Ceci
And then
was a guy like, Cody Ceci couldn't hack it as a third pair here in Toronto, and all of a sudden now, like, I wouldn't say he's, excelling in a top 4 role, but he hasn't been a detriment, I guess, to the team. I mean, he's played every game, he's playing an average of 20 minutes a night, and his team's in the cup final. He must be doing a couple things right.
he definitely, and the funny thing is that it hasn't phased Florida one bit. They're like, oh, you wanna play Cody Ceci like that against us? We're just gonna make Cody Ceci become a liability, right? Him and Darnell
I
Nurse.
mean, yes. Yeah, they were in a sense in that game, but it's like the fact that they've even gotten there is kind of wild to me. It's like look at the blue line on Edmonton. Is really that much better than Toronto's blue line? Like the way that Toronto's blue line ended up being like look at their game 7 against Boston versus like Saturday night's Edmonton blue line.
Yeah.
Is it really that much better?
In my opinion, no. Especially because you have Evan Bouchard. Take away Evan Bouchard, and it's like behind, or even just look past Evan Bouchard, and it's like that blue line made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Final.
Well, Evan Bouchard puts up a bunch of points, and he's got a bomb of a shot that helps on their power play. That is
Yeah.
a big thing that Toronto does not have, obviously,
Right.
but kind of a liability in his own end. He's not
Yep.
great defensively. He's kind of like a Morgan Riley in that he's Morgan Riley, but he actually puts up points and has a bomb of a
Yeah.
shot. He's what we wish Morgan Riley was, and he's a right shot. Realistically, he's like a better version of I guess like what Tyson Berry was in that case. Like
Yeah. He's the reason why Tyson Barrie is not an Edmonton Oiler anymore.
That's true. Yeah, we made him expendable. But outside of that, like obviously Matthias Ekholm's great. He's a top pair defenseman. He's like a bona fide number 2 guy, a little bit better, I think, than what the Leafs have. But outside of that, like Darnell Nurse isn't
Such
that
a
great. Is Darnell Nurse that much better than Jake McCabe?
This is the first. It was talked about a little bit, but this is like the first time you're really seeing people say he's kind of overpaid, and he right.
I've been saying that since the day he signed that contract.
Well, but now it's become more
Seth
apparent.
Jones, I was like, excuse me.
I mentioned that the Edmonton Oilers have to sign Evan Bouchard next year or going into next year. Like Darnell Nurse is part of the reason why they're going to be in a very tough cap situation. The guy makes $9+ million to be your second pairing at worst number 4, number 3, number 4. Like that's
number 3,
brutal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like he had that 1 year where he scored 16 goals, which like God help me, I don't know how he managed to pull that off. And then that led to him getting that big payday. But man, like I know a lot of Oilers fans are concerned about the cap situation because that deal is on their cap.
But like Brett Kulak, Cody Ceci, Philip Broberg, like
Broberg's actually like
he's played well, but he's a guy who was in the minors for most of the season.
Yeah.
Like, he's played well the last couple of games. Okay, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So he might turn into something. But again, he's someone who literally was in Bakersfield for most of the season. Like,
yeah.
And
now they weren't exactly doing right by his development, in my opinion.
No,
he was like he was.
We talk all the time about how Toronto's blue line not good enough, absolutely not good enough. Can't win with this blue line. Well, the Edmonton Oilers are kind of winning with a pretty patchy blue line, if you ask me.
They are.
No,
they definitely are, and
it's not like they have a terrific goaltender to like mask the blue line deficiencies too, like Vasilevsky has been able to do in Tampa Bay. So kind of interesting.
And this is why a team like Florida. That's why when I did my prediction, I'm like, this blue, like their forecheck makes puts a lot of pressure on that blue line to move the puck out of there quickly. If they don't get that puck out, that forecheck, you saw it. Sam Bennett comes down and hard forecheck, takes the puck, passes it off to Rodriguez, and it's in the back of the net.
Yeah,
Edmonton's going to get victimized by that a lot.
Dallas was a hard forechecking team. Vancouver was a hard forechecking team. They found ways to get around it. It's only one game. Only one game.
I would say Florida's the more physical team than Dallas was, but I do get I don't know, just the way they do it though. They're ruthless. They are like out of all those teams, they are the. I don't know. Some of those guys are going to need like ice baths for a month after the Stanley Cup playoffs are done.
Yeah, legitimately, I agree with that sentiment. What do you think happens game 2?
I think it's going to be Edmonton will finally score. I think it'll take a little time. I think they finally will solve Bob. I do think this is you might see a bit of a split here. I think the power play will wake up a bit and I think guys are going to get more comfortable offensively. Like you give breakaways to Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, he's not going to miss that many times, right? He will find a way. I think that's going to be something that Florida's going to have to work on. But I think Edmonton will take game 2.
Yeah, it's tough to say like, oh, Bobrovsky can have another game like he just had, but like I've seen him do that for a month straight before. Yep. So it's like, yeah, actually he can. But I think Edmonton leaves with a split and goes home with a tied up series. I think they'll respond. They've been really good at responding so far throughout this season. So I think they respond pretty well. And McDavid. I think McDavid's going to put on a show for us tonight in game number 2. All right. There was also some Leafs draft notes that kind of came out from over the weekend at the NHL Draft Combine. We'll get to that tomorrow. There were 6 individual players that reportedly the Leafs met with. So we'll kind of dive into those players tomorrow and throughout the week a little bit. So we'll get to that, on a later date. We're gonna maybe try and squeeze it in, but I think we've gone too long. So we'll get into that tomorrow. So that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On at Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.